Alrighty, my friends, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Um, hey, what was I talking about? Nothing. You just started the episode. Good point. Well said. Hey, I just wanted to find out how you guys are doing on this this week in the world of what's happening, and I was talking to an aunt of mine, and it almost seems like the world has this cycle of crazy shit that keeps coming, right? And we're seeing this. Of course, there are four main things. Maybe now, what are the common things? It's obviously flooding. Then we have obviously the cyclones, the hurricane, and oh, sorry guys, this fucking computer's talking. Fucking no, absolutely no respect. My computer to me just talks over me. So yeah, we have tornadoes. No, so we have the cyclones and hurricanes. We have the heavy rains, and then we have flooding, landslides as a result. So water-based stuff like lube. Then you have we don't have fire, right? Fires, of course. In that California, a lot of fires are happening from barbecues. Then you have pretty much those two. Wind-based stuff, I think wind and water go. It's like almost like I'm trying to understand if we can come up with a new version of Captain Planet, but they're bad. They've gone from their planet-saving activities. They got disillusioned with the entire environmental movement, and they became junkies. They saw Greta Thunberg, and they're like, fuck this. She's really preachy, annoying me. They're like, oh, she can do it, or whatever it may be, whatever fucks teenagers up, and they're like, screw it, it all sucks, it's all a conspiracy. And they got into like I don't know, maybe the guy who was so the five guys, remember there was the black guy who was Earth, because of course color. There was the I'm joking, of course. Then there was the Earth guy, there was the wind guy, the gas guy, I call him. There was earth, fire, wind, water, and heart, right? Of course, heart being, I think, a native guy, because of course they have no say, because none of the writers in the show were Native Americans. There was wind, I think that was the guy. There was water, that's the girl. There was fire. So there's one hot chick. There was also one hot chick. There was a show when I was growing up called Johnny Quest, and there was a really hot chick called Jessie. Of course, she was animated, but whoa, man, my quest it really ended there for my Johnny. But so yeah, I was thinking, what if that shit went bad, right? So maybe those kids really lost perspective, got disillusioned with the entire environmental campaign, and Captain Planet ended up being a pedophile. So they were like, fuck this, dude. I can't believe I had this ring which I could do so much with, and they've messed up, and that's why we experience all this. So it's not global warming, it's the Captain Planet family gone wild. Yeah, that'll be a really good show, like Girls Gone Wild, Captain Planet Gone Wild. So every week you'll have one element, like a fire guy. And that's happening. If you think about it, you have the forest fires, the sequoia forest being burned down. Then you have, something happened in India, in Kashmir, at the Amarnath pilgrimage site. There was another flash flood, a lot of people. And why do people keep going back? I don't understand. It's every year, same time. I mean, I have no issues with you guys going on a pilgrimage, but every year. And it's almost like, shit, dude, just go ahead and do it, Just the Captain Planet family will take care of its elements and just reduce the population by say, go. Just between this, it's almost like the travel agencies, these people who plan these pilgrimages, these travel tours, are in sync with either the Captain Planet family, or the environment, and they're just like, make sure it happens at this time. We'll fuck it up. We'll unleash the elements. Yeah, looks like it. But there's no. Maybe you need to add new elements, like how the universe of these superheroes grows. You need to add more elements which are more relevant. Like you have the social media powers, like anxiety, depression. You have the other things like racism, or you have things like gun control and wars and fossil fuels. So think about it. Any of you are inclined, because I have the ideas. I just am fucking lazy. So as you guys know, I'm not going to sit down and write a script and pitch it to one of these stupid bastards like Amazon Prime or Sony or Netflix who are just like, no, but what about your social media following? What about your social media footprint? I'm like, oh, fuck yourself. You executive who's no clue about creativity. Not at all bitter. So you guys, if you are more inclined, go ahead and do this, and I'll totally not back you because it's my idea. But no, jokes apart, I think just another week in the world, and I am going to continue living because talking about my aunt. Yes, that's where I started, and look where I went. She's getting old and she's like, I'm going to lose my memory. I'm worried I'm losing my mind. I'm losing my memory. I'm like, you're not. This is something that a lot of human people do. Yes, not the human beings, the human people. They are so caught up in the idea of losing something that they don't enjoy that. And when they forget, when it's gone, like memory, when it's gone, you're not going to look back and go, oh, I shouldn't have worried about losing my memory, because you're not going to remember that you lost your memory. How fucked up is that? So what does that lesson have to say? 21 lessons for the 21st century. Yeah, it's a song by BTS. By the way, so there's no moral in that, just telling you. But speaking of BTS, so as you guys know, my wife and I have a baby, and my wife just came back home with our baby, so I'm very happy that they are home. Yeah, it's beautiful having a little girl, a baby girl, and you sleep a little less, but it's perfectly fine. But my wife's like, one night she goes to sleep earlier with baby's timings, and then she's like, what are you doing? What are you watching in the night? And I was like, ooh, I can't tell you. She's like, come on, dude, it's gross. There's a baby. I'm like, no, I can't. Yeah. Guys, this is my nighttime routine. Before I sleep, I have to watch a couple of BTS videos. I'm not proud of it, but it's become, I can't control it. Smooth like butter. Yeah. If this becomes a reason for you to sign off this podcast, I'm sorry. I know I let you down, but man, I like that song. So I apologize for you non-BTS fans, but they're breaking up. No, not that crazy, dude, but it's just that it's a thang. So anyhow, I have a lovely guest on today's episode, as always, Kayla Nguyen. I hope I get it right, Kayla. She's a PhD student. I mean, she's a, I don't know the right word, PhD fellow. She's right now in her doctorate. I don't know the right word. I'm not qualified to give her an introduction. But anyway, she's a PhD fellow. She's a PhD. She's not a PhD. She's a person. She's a woman. She's a PhD. Focusing her research in using electron microscopes in basically going down to the atomic level, understanding atomic structures, various things within that atomic thing, how to apply them to the real world, to real problems, and understanding to get more clarity of these things between levels, atomic levels. I'm doing a horrible job of the introduction, but you guys will get it. It's basically to do with atoms. It's to do with how they can be used and understood better to affect medicine, to affect biology. God, just scrap this intro. To affect biology, to affect various things that you and I are affected by. Let's just put it that way. Kayla lives in Illinois. We talk about her experience being an Asian woman in the present climate in America. I'm not talking about summer. I'm talking about, of course, the entire anti-Asian sentiment and all these various horrible things happening. Lovely conversation with a very smart and lovely human being. So do enjoy my conversation. I'm sure you will. I think the introduction was not really something that introductions should sound like, but you know who I am and how I am. But trust me on this, great conversation with a lovely person, and you will enjoy it. And as always, I hope you're well. Do share this episode with someone and with everyone, with your mom, with her mom, with your dog and your dog's mom. So take care of yourselves. Enjoy this, and till the next time. Goodbye, God bless. Take care of yourselves. Catch you on the other side. Cheers. Kayla Nguyen, welcome to the SoapyRao show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Lovely. So it's again one of these situations where it's morning for you, it's evening for me. I'm very excited that we're at this point where we are connecting and talking about a topic which I'm totally uneducated about, but I want to know what you specialize in and study and what you've developed and what you put out in the market for science enthusiasts out there. And for those of us who are not really keyed into the scientific developments, I think you're a great person to help us on this episode. But I mean, first of all, you were telling me before we started recording about this, about your last name and the nuance of how it's pronounced. So, could you tell my listeners who didn't have the chance of the sneak peek about that?
Oh yeah, so my last name is spelled Nguyen,
Mm-hmm.
but in Vietnamese we pronounce it Wing, and but it's Romanized because French colonialism came to Vietnam and they decided to Romanize the language. Originally, it was written in characters similar to Chinese characters.
Right.
And so, because of the Romanization and because of the French, and it's also a tonal language, what happens is that you have all these letters in my name, but you kind of don't pronounce most of them. And so, instead of saying like Gu Yen or whatever you would pronounce phonetically, you just
Yeah.
say it Nguyen, and that's it. Yeah, it's kind of funny.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that because, and the reason I asked you that is, it's you know, a lot of people say what's in a name, right? And you kind of, especially now since you're in America, I know Indians who sort of taken their lengthy name and shortened it because it's easier for their colleagues to pronounce it or to address them. But I was talking to this reverend from Zambia, right? And he was talking about how the empowerment of keeping your name, because there's an entire resurgence, or rather not even resurgence, reclamation movement where people are trying to get and recognize their original African name, for instance, because one of the things that colonizers do or the colonial structure does is take away a name. And this is something, it sounds like what they've done, because there is probably a lot of meaning and there's a lot of tradition beyond behind a certain name given to a family or to a certain group of people in a certain region. And by taking that away, you kind of say, oh, it's convenient. But I'm not saying in today's day and age, but it was done many years back. But the reason that's why I brought it up about your last name. And right now for you, you're sitting in Chicago, and there was a horrific thing that happened a few weeks back on the 4th of July, right, with the parade and the shootings, and even if I'm not mistaken, a few weeks before that, the whole Korean band BTS meeting President Biden and Kamala Harris about this whole Asian inclusion and the entire movement, which is trying to sort of prevent hate crimes against Asians. So, what has it been? How has it been for you over the past few months, and I mean, past few years maybe, but more specifically with all these tensions heating up and the entire sentiment in with post-COVID against Asians?
Yeah. Well, I guess like there's a lot of layers to that question, and I want to make sure that I'm answering in a way that comes off as really effective because with situations like this, like, obviously with COVID, there's so many things going on. There have been a lot of deaths around the world because of this pandemic. And, it's hard for us to lose focus of what was like the origins of all these problems. And
Mm,
then, with all these things going on, there's a lot of frustration. And it's very easy to find somebody or something to take your frustration on. Unfortunately, it just had to be a group of people that, people assume cause these problems. But obviously, because it's a pandemic, these things aren't made by certain people.
mm,
And so we have all these hate crimes and racism. And it, stems back from a lot of things. Like if it wasn't started in China or if the first discovery of it wasn't in Asia, it could have been anywhere else. I think
yeah.
that that's one of the really scary things is that people can't disentangle a disease or a pandemic from its origins. And I think that was really not great. And then all of this, led to a lot of just racism against Asian Americans who had, who like were raised and born in the U.S., so had
Mm,
no influence on whatever was going on. And I think it was really, I think the hardest part for me um, was the racism against Asian women in particular, especially in New York City. I think I was really hurt when, the story of the woman who was pushed off of the subway platform into a moving train because she was Asian American, and somebody thought that it was okay. Like, there has just been a lot of violence against Asian women, and I just feel that we should really talk about that. And as a society, we just, we say it, but they are targeting certain people, and they're murdering people, just because they think if they're easy targets. And it's sort of, or with Highland Park shooting, there was a man who was dressed as a woman and was just shooting randomly. I think that i think that as a society ourselves, we are really frustrated. And so if we can just talk about our frustration, if we can just like have a conversation, or at least educate one another about what's going on. And I think that if we're willing to listen to one another, I think a lot of these problems could be solved just by talking and listening. But obviously, there are still things going on, and there's no easy fix for a very complicated and layered situation, such as the after effects of the pandemic.
Yeah, I find it fascinatingly upsetting. I don't know if that's even the right way to express that, because I lived for a few years in the U.S. It was for my undergrad in the Northwest, in a small town in Oregon, and obviously it was just a little
Lewis and
slice.
Clark, did you go to Lewis
No,
and
I went to
Clark?
a small, like Lewis and Clark. It was a liberal arts
Okay.
college called Linfield College.
Okay. Okay, cool. Awesome.
And it was lovely. I mean, I have absolutely wonderful memories from college. My college was about 1,600 people, and I think there were probably less than 5% colored people, which I never felt threatened at any point. I never the town was predominantly I mean, it was a college town, but a lot of it was also a rural town, right? It wasn't really attached to a suburb of Portland. It was kind of like a small place where um, predominantly farming, and the mindset was, of course, of a small town, and people owned guns, people went hunting. I never felt like I was um, under threat. But the context in America, which I haven't been for a few years, but it's very scary when um, when you want to look at someone, and instead of saying they're American or they're a human being, you kind of look for the difference immediately. And the reason I noticed now, when I went last was in 2016 to San Francisco, and I felt like people are trying to be different, like with whatever, whether it's what they eat, whether they look different, whether they are punk, or whether they're tattooing up, whatever they're trying to find traits which are different. Now, I think each individual wants to be different, but I'm just trying to get to a point where um, I know Indians, American Indians, right? I wouldn't say Native Americans, but they're Indians from America who are born there, like you, who's Asian born in America, and it's very confusing for them because they don't know if they are American or whether they're Indian. Like, I don't know what that means. Like, I want to ask you that, because this whole thing of racism, it seems like one group always gets the brunt of it, right? Like early on, many years back, it was the Italians, the Irish, the Polish. So that sort of subsided. Then the Asians came in, and then closer to our history, like I'm sure with the Vietnamese after the Vietnam War, they experienced a lot of racism then. But then, of course, you had 9/11, and then brown people, especially Arabs, had it. Then black people had another resurgence of racism. So it seems, I don't know, what does it feel, because I'm not an American. I lived for a few years, and I was protected by living on a university college campus. But for you as an Asian, I mean, it's more specifically a Vietnamese, but who's born and brought up in America, what are the values that you would say are American, and in what sort of list or priority would you say you have to do a trade in, where you're like, I have to take these many things which make me Vietnamese, these many things that I have to sort of make me American, whatever that means. I don't know what it means to be American, but what is the sort of mix? Because I feel a lot of times people are lost. They're neither here nor there. So what has the experience for you been?
Um, so I'm actually gonna answer this with a conversation I had with my friend who's from Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
So I recently had, so she started school at a university in Chicago, and we were talking about like the concept of Asian American, Italian American, and just like ethnic like Americans in general. And then she said that in Brazil, um, even if your family's from Taiwan, you are considered Brazilian. Like there's no such thing as like Chinese Brazilian or Japanese Brazilian. You're just considered
It just sounds
Brazilian.
absurd when you just said that. It's like what? Like, like yeah, you wouldn't say a black Indian or an African Indian like when they come to here. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, right.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
when you think about it, okay, so why are we separating, but why are we also being inclusive at the same time? And
Mm.
so, that so then when I thought about it, I think that, as Americans, we are all like Americans. And being Asian American, being Vietnamese American, what we're doing is we're sort of you know, keeping part of our culture and owning that, but also, owning our part as an American in the US. And, um, when it comes to consensus, it's really important to um, disentangle certain information, because what happens is that if you group people together, there are situations and there are backgrounds that you miss when you kind of group people together. But when you kind of separate them, then then you're being a little bit exclusive. So the question is, um, how can we be inclusive but then still consider ourselves like part of a whole? And I think that's kind of in a way a personal choice, like whether you consider
Mm.
yourself like 50% American and 50% Vietnamese, or 100% American because you were born and raised here, or because you've immigrated here when you were 18 years old, but you lived here your whole entire life until you're like 80. Like, are you an American, or um, are your ties somewhere else? And to me, I think that is more of a personal choice. I think that what you identify yourself as, how they say that sexuality is a spectrum, gender is a spectrum, and so is your identity, and that's okay. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
That's absolutely true because I think I see a trend now where people, like even the Indian Americans, are trying to come back and find their roots, and they're trying to wear Indian clothes, and they're like, oh, I don't like it when people, you know, they just, I'm just giving a random example, not a true story, but they say things like, oh, it's, when say a white woman wears a sari and a bindi, I find it offensive. I'm like, see, this is the problem. This is the space which gets a little irritating or annoying or a little troublesome, because it's almost like the words cultural appropriation are thrown around so loosely when there are actual issues where a person's culture is taken away and wiped away because what we see is happening in Ukraine with Russia. It's like no one understands the cultural context, but they just say, "Oh, it's an invasion." Of course, I'm not a political scientist or an international relations expert, but that's when words like cultural appropriation are severely contemplated, because that's when nations that are so vastly intertwined for thousands of years are being sort of taken in the stride of geopolitics, and at the same time you have someone saying, oh, I don't like it when someone does yoga. It's like, okay, what is important, what isn't important, right? But like for you, when what does it mean, like when someone says, are you Asian American or are you Vietnamese Asian? What are the values that you embrace as an American? Because of course, for you, that is home. You're a citizen of the United States. So, what is something that you appreciate? Let's, instead of looking at the negative and the separation that's going on, but what's something that keeps you content and keeps you grounded? As I'm proud, or I'm so grateful to be an American.
Well, I can't help when people identify me as an American or Asian American, because obviously I look Asian, so I
Mm,
can't even lie.
yeah.
But I am American because if you meet me, it's very obvious. That's what people say. So yeah.
You
So
should meet
I
people
think
like me. I
that
didn't even know you were Asian. I thought your last name was more of a. I don't know what it was actually. That's why I was like, Somnath, have you spelled her last name right? Like,
yeah, no, 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 no. And honestly, my last name has been misspelled so many times
mm,
and mispronounced that it's gotten to a point where it's okay. Like, I'm not really that mad. Like,
yeah.
if you see something different and you kind of made like a full like you pronounce something differently, like I would
Yeah.
do the same thing, right? If I were pronouncing somebody's Indian first or last name.
Yeah.
And, before that, I usually apologize
Yeah.
because I know I will mispronounce it. But like sometimes, like, um, this is really funny. I just thought of a lyric to a song. It's do you know "Careless Whisper" by George Michael?
Oh my God, yes. Why didn't you tell me this at the
Okay,
beginning of the
so
conversation?
yeah, so in his song he says, "To the heart and mind, ignorance is kind." And so
Mm,
I'm
mm.
just playing off this ignorance because I know that I will hopefully not make a mistake, but in actuality I will.
It's
But
totally fine. That's why I asked you, at the beginning, how do I pronounce
yeah,
your name? Because it's NGU, and I don't know the full spelling, but it's like, for instance, I told you about the Zambian reverend. His last name was Mumwazi, and I was like, no way am I going to get this right. So it was spelled
yeah,
Mwambazi, and I'm like, how do you pronounce it, right? And it's something you learn. Like Mumwazi, it's like cool. So I thought maybe your name is something similar. I'm like, oh, it's going to be it's going to be a cool pronunciation, and it is. And that's why I wanted to talk about your name, even though the idea is to talk about your science and the focus. I mean, I'm like, these things are as relevant as opposed to just the thing that you are spending your time studying. And speaking of that, now
yeah,
you go into the atomic level and the molecular
yeah,
level, and
yeah,
you look at something which is so vastly fundamental to the existence of life in some ways, or the universe in many ways. So when you look at these superficial separations and you look at the thing, and I think in your talk which you gave, you talk about the small which is so vast and the vast that is so small, which I think is a beautiful way of capturing this entire conversation and also capturing what's going on in the world. So when you are studying something which is electrons, and you're looking at such a level how the electrons can sort of understand these things in the human body, or how medicine can be benefited from it, and all these things which of course I would like you to talk about. What is your thing? How do you get perspective on society when you're in the lab or wherever you do your research, and you have such a drill down focus on this in this area, and then you sort of re-immerse yourself in society, and you're like, wait a second, we're all on the atomic level the same, right?
yeah. Um, so I guess like before I start, is it okay if I just kind of talk about what I do first?
Yes,
And
please.
so it,
Yeah,
it gives it a lot of context. So
yeah.
um, I'm a scientist, and what I do is I use a microscope, called an electron microscope, to take pictures of individual atoms,
Mm-hmm.
which makes us up basically everything in the universe. And the reason why studying these atomic structures are really important is because um, we can develop better technologies, like better, faster computers, because um, the interface between computer devices are just a couple of atomic units cell across. Or drugs that we develop to deliver medicine into the bodies, they're also really small. And if we can understand at the atomic level these sort of protein structures, we can also make better medicine to cure diseases. And for in my research, what I did was I built a detector that is much better than all the other detectors around, and that gives us more information than what we had before. And from that, we can utilize this information. And so, um, and so right now, in my work, I'm trying to push imaging resolution beyond, the current resolution that we have. And I'm looking at these atomic structures called two-dimensional dicollagenides. In 2010, there was this Nobel Prize for graphene. They're just like a single atomic layer of material. And if you take two materials and you stack them together, you make these really interesting moire structures. And so recently, I was looking at my data, and I was thinking about Islamic art, because a lot of my structures, they have these sort of patterns that are very similar to Islamic art, where you have these structures that you can either draw hexagons, pentagons, because atomic structures are just made up of shapes that look like squares, hexagons, pentagons, octagons. And then, but what you do is there's just a tessellation of these structures. And so if you kind of just add them next to each other, they give you sort of this sort of infinite space of just shapes. And in Islamic art, it's very similar to that. It's just a tessellation of shapes that represents kind of a sense of infinity. And so,
Very
I thought
interesting.
that was really inspiring when I learned more about the origins of that. of the art.
Do,
Yeah.
do you think that, because there are a lot of, studies, a lot of revelations in that space where we, if someone looks at, say, go the Stonehenge, or someone looks at the pyramids, or ancient architecture, or someone looks at astronomy from certain ancient civilizations, or someone talks about, say, the golden ratio. So do you think these people, these groups, these cultures, these ancient art forms, do you think they were aware of these things, or is it sort of a coincidence?
That's a really good question. It's also very deep because I think that human form, we can reduce ourselves into like shapes, like, or spheres.
Mm,
And what's really interesting about the atomic structures is that we can also reduce it to shapes like squares, circles, hexagon, pentagons, and also spheres.
mm,
Um, and so I think that, you know, like for example, math was developed in the ancient world, like this sort of the way that we look at math or
mm,
algebra and things like that. Like all these sort of concepts were developed in the ancient world that come out very naturally that we
mm,
see now in like modern physics or modern science. And to connect, for example, what was mathematically proven to what we can actually see now, I think I find that really amazing. Like, I'm not sure if when people were doing it, they were predicting sort of some sort of scientific breakthrough, but they
mm,
were using the resources that they had to understand the world around them, and that's essentially what we're doing.
mm.
We're building models to understand what's around us, and so were the people when they look at the constellation or they look at the stars. They were building models that they can see around them to explain the universe.
Yeah,
And
it's yeah,
we're still asking the same questions, to be
yeah.
honest, even though we have a lot of new tools and new
Mm.
understanding.
Yeah, I find the reason I asked you that is because I find it fascinating when you read about, say, like the Vedic science, or you read about certain designs of
Yeah.
the mantras, and how the power of the vibration affects on the atomic level, and how we are constantly in vibration, and these things resonate and make more space within the body. I'm obviously making it into a much more simplified form of it. That's what I understand, but it's amazing what it does, because then you look at medicine and they say there's a certain reason why certain diseases are there, because of whatever it may be, the lack of space, or these atomic structures are the shapes that are supposed to be for the best way for this organism to function are out of sync. And it's amazing how, if it is, I mean, most likely it is, how they arrived at these discoveries, and how they designed certain practices to help you keep. And of course, for us, it's our immediate concern is our physical body and physical mind, and then once we look past that, it's the next sort of plane of consciousness, if you want to go down that path. But even that, just to keep a healthy body and mind, it's crazy how we, in today's day and age, with all the modernization, with all these advancements of understanding our environment, are still so distracted from something which, of course, I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it's the reality is that while we know a lot more, we seem to be doing more harm to this physical organism, right?
Yeah. We only have one practice try in life, and whatever we do, we just have to take our chance, right?
Yeah.
Like in the words of Yoda, do or do not, there is no try.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
um I think that I think that, we could, I think like, so I'm not a medical doctor, so I
yeah,
can't say anything about like my knowledge of medicine. I'm really just a scientist who uses electrons to take pictures and makes
yeah,
detectors. But what I can really say from my research is that the things that happen on the atomic level or on the nanometer level
mm,
affects everything else,
yeah,
just as a big thing affects like another big thing. The
yeah.
small things are really important. And I think that if we overlook these details, then we're missing the whole entire picture, because that's kind of where the origins of everything starts from.
Yeah, and that's what fascinates me, because I don't know anything. And I think a lot of people just, are so bored out of these concepts in school because they're like, oh, are you crazy? Atomic? No, it's too small. I can't see it. What's the point, right? But that's something which I think is mind blowing because it's what you're studying through these visuals on that level, while it might not be visible to the naked eye, and all of us, we talk about high resolution phones and things, and you're going to another level of high resolution. Um, what is it that, and the thing when we talk about atoms or atomic level, it's usually bombs, right? The atomic bomb. But how can we, and you spoke about it briefly, but maybe in something in terms that people listening could sort of apply to daily life or to the future of this planet, or how we can leverage this, is why would how could someone harness this information and leverage it, whether it be, you mentioned briefly about medical developments and how we can understand it on an atomic level, but what are some of the practical applications of this discovery on an atomic level?
Right. So, for example, your computers, that's one thing. Right now, if you compare it to how much data we can store in a tiny flash drive, about maybe like 10 years ago versus now, the way that we're making these bits for memory storage, it's getting smaller and smaller than what we had before. And because we're making them smaller and smaller, we're using a lot of technologies in order to do research to make them smaller and smaller. One big thing that's going on right now is quantum computing, quantum information. For example, there are algorithms where it could take a regular computer like 10 years, but it'll take a quantum computer like maybe like 10 seconds to figure out. And
Wow.
so,
Okay.
being
That's
able to do like quantum computing, you need to understand things on the atomic level because you're developing these sort of qubit systems that does these operations. And you want to make sure that the devices are very clean, the interfaces, you have a lot of coherence. Coherence is a thing. It means how long you can calculate your computing in your qubit system. And so coherence gives you a length scale of how long that calculation can be. And what people are doing now is they're trying to improve coherence time so they can do longer calculations and more difficult calculations that are really important. And so in order to understand what's going on, you need tools that can probe at the atomic or nanometer scale levels. And in the future, we're hoping to utilize like quantum information. And right now we're utilizing like memory storage technology and putting things on the cloud and things like that. And that all relies on this sort of like atomic scale technology.
Is there a way to, because it's I mean, this is my ignorance coming out, but is the atom the smallest unit?
Well, so the atoms are made up of electrons, protons, and neutrons. And then
Yeah.
within that, you have quarks. And then within that, you have more subatomic particles. So the answer is yes and no. Like you can definitely see what an atomic structure looks like. You can just image it. It's just a structure. But the atom itself is made up of multiple smaller structures and smaller in that and smaller in that. Yeah.
But is there a way to? So you said we through this discovery, through understanding it more, we're able to make more efficient, more compact storage device, etc. But is there a way to condense this size? Like we as humans love manipulating things that we find. We're like, oh wait, this is small. Let's make it smaller. So can we do that on an atomic level? Can we make more space between atoms, or can we make atoms themselves smaller? Or can we make them more? I don't know. The word is vibrate at a certain frequency. Can we manipulate its functionality so to benefit us and also kind of bend it to our will because that's what we like doing as humans, right? At some level, is that something we can leverage to transcend this planet, like space travel or interstellar travel or whatever?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, like making materials is sort of like cooking. Like you have a lot of different ingredients and you mix it together and you get this amazing meal. The same thing happens when you take atomic structures. For example, you look at the periodic table, there's different elements. And what you can do is you can take the elements together, you can like shake it up, and then now you have this material that is superconducting at room temperature, or you have this material that is has this gigantic magnetic damping, which is great for making couplers between a quantum qubit and light, because in order to utilize a quantum computer, you need to take that quantum information and send it out to optical fibers, like a quantum internet. And so that's something that we could do. We can make new materials that haven't existed in this universe. What we can
Wow.
also do is, for example, take our material, such as two-dimensional materials, when you're talking about bending. So the two-dimensional material, because it's an atomic flare sheet, we can put it on top of a substrate, and then we can actually bend it. And then as we're bending the material, we're actually changing its electronic properties as well. Or we can take a laser, shine light at it, and then we can vibrate the molecules. We can, instead of taking laser and shine light, what we can do is we can take a like sort of like a microwave resonator, kind of like the radio frequency, and then we can also vibrate that at different frequencies. So there's so many things that we can do to manipulate molecules, because imagine you have these molecules sort of like on a string. What we can do is we can also just whack it, and we can whack it physically, or we can whack it with the with a laser. We can whack it with different material system, and then change everything like that. And so it will vibrate at different modes depending on how hard or soft we whack it at. If that makes any sense.
I know it. Yeah, I mean, it's just that this is how you communicate with your colleagues every day, and I'm just like, interesting. I should spend a day. I'll just be totally lost. But I got the whacking part. Okay.
I mean, I guess like, you know, I also do a lot of outreach to a lot of young people in the Midwest and also around here. Like we're in it. I live in actually Urbana, Illinois, which is surrounded by cornfields. And
Where?
so
Sorry, I didn't get that.
I live in Urbana, Illinois.
Oh,
so
right.
It's actually
That's
about like
UIUC,
two
right.
and a half hours. Yeah, exactly. Oh,
Yeah.
2.5 hours away from Chicago. And I do a lot of outreach to like the middle schools around here. And so in order to like convey these sort of high level concepts to middle schoolers, you have to use certain language so that they'll understand. Like I'm never going to use something sort of too far reaching. And so I think that in order to get people excited, you have to tell them what's important and tell them what's so cool about it. And I think that's really exciting because, you know, we also need to get more young women into science, particularly more into physics, chemistry, and material science. Just because there has been just a lack of there's been a kind of a disparity in the genders due to that.
So how did I mean? I think it's interesting to know how you got into this space, because it is quite a niche space, and it's one of those things which is fantastic from my understanding, my limited knowledge of it. I think what you've just explained is quite helpful in getting a better picture of what, you know, how to bridge that sort of really in technical details to a daily application. But it, even for someone who's in the space of physics or chemistry, it is a very sort of specialized corner, if you want to call it a specialized area, right?
Yeah. I think that, I guess like for my origin story, when I was younger, I really wanted to be an astronaut. I went to this talk by Sally Ride. She was the first American woman in space, and she showed all these like awesome pictures of her in the space station, like floating and traveling to space. And I thought it'd be really cool. I think that people in my age group right now, they're getting sent off to Mars. And I think that, you know, at that time, they were motivating young children. Like, if you start now in science, you can be one of the first explorers to Mars, and this would be awesome. This would be really exciting. But then, you know, I went to college and I wanted to study physics. I realized that I wasn't really passionate about big things. I was actually really passionate about small things. And I think that at that time, it was sort of the rise in nanoscience. Like nanoscience was getting really large, and people were making all these discoveries and looking at very tiny things. And then while I was an undergrad, the Nobel Prize was given in for graphene. Like it's a two-dimensional material that's atomic layer thick. And I thought that would be really exciting to get into that field. And I think that and then when I applied for my PhD program, that's when you get really specialized. So, and I guess you can't really plan your life. I sort of kind of stumble upon it based on things that I really like and things that I felt was really interesting. And I guess that's kind of how people sort of fall in love. Like you kind of fall in love doing something that you just do, and you kind of it kind of just happen. Like you can't plan for these things, like what
Yeah.
you're passionate about. You can't say that, I'm gonna plan this and that this is my passion for the rest of my life. Like nobody who says that has ever had
Yeah.
that.
Who knows?
And usually
Maybe on
when
a universe, the universe had a design on an atomic level for you.
yeah, like fatalism, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes I just wonder, everything that happens to us and the people we interact with, like, maybe it'll be important in the future, or maybe there's a reason for everything that happens and we just don't know why yet at the time. And
That's what a very interesting thing, because we always, when something in our so-called right and wrong, when something good or right happens, we never question it. But when something wrong happens, we're like, why didn't it happen? Why? And maybe we should sort of look at why things don't happen as a sign of maybe there is more work you need to put in there. Maybe you're not ready for something. But we never question the wrong which happens to us as something that's right.
yeah, I do think that like the wrong that happens to us will help us build resilience that will help us in the future. That's
Hmm.
something that I know is 100% true.
Yeah.
If we can get over it, build a resilience, then we sort of avoid future problems. But we don't know what the future problems are because we can't predict the future. And
Yeah.
even if they were going to be future problems, we avoided it, so we don't actually know what the heck happened. So yeah,
Yeah.
so I think that, but there's always a lesson to be learned when something bad happens. The question is whether or not we're willing to learn and improve from that and move on. That's kind of like the big societal question. Like, can we learn from our past mistakes and move on so that we can better ourselves for the future?
Nicely said. No, I'm so it's so encouraging to hear people like you who are not just focusing on your on something you really are. I think going so much into detail, and you're making a practical device that you and your team developed and is out there for a much more clearer picture on the atomic level. And you hear of these studies, or you hear of these projects within Google, like Ray Kurzweil. I don't know if it's still on, but I read somewhere that he's doing the project for using nanotechnology to sort of maintain the body. And you have, say Neuralink, which is supposedly going to help with certain issues and brain disorders, etc., etc. And eventually, there is rumors that it's going to help with like non-verbal communication. And so, does the space you're in at some point, because you said it is the smallest level, but yet the smallest level has the farthest impact. So, when you look at what you do look at, you said something from Islamic art to maybe even the biology of a certain organism. Is there potential of what you are discovering to be applied in these spaces?
It's currently being applied right now, right?
Ooh,
So,
okay.
yeah, so I think that, with, AI technology and the technology that we have, or just, connecting that with human forms, we need to look at the interfaces between these two technologies. And so at the interface, if you zoom down to, the structural level, it's at the atomic level, no matter what, because we are all made up of atoms. And if something goes wrong at the atomic level, everything else goes wrong in the system. And so, and Google especially has invested a lot in quantum information, and that is something that Google has a big, big market in. So yeah,
So when you say quantum, it's basically not the binary system that we know, right?
exactly. Yeah, it's
Ah,
quantum information. Yeah, it's like basically, like the spin qubits. It's like that, uh,
so it's five
quadra
dimensional. Is that what? No, maybe.
like quadrupole, like 4-bit type of system where you have like different spins and spins orientations and things like that. Yeah.
It's crazy how in a matter of 30 years we've gone from the first personal computer to now, where we're like, yeah, that's good and all, but let's. And I think there's so much more. And it's amazing to hear what you're doing, Kayla, because I think it's so important to people who have been, especially people who are listening, maybe in a more traditional Asian setup at home, where they've forced science and engineering down their throat and they really don't want to do it because it's just almost such narrow-minded fields that are their opportunities. But hearing your story, and also hearing about the work you're doing to encourage young women and young girls to get into the space, because it doesn't have to only be, because in India, one of my guests who was on the podcast a week back was talking. He's written a book called The Great Indian Obsession about how everyone is an engineer, but you really don't understand why you're becoming one. It's just sort of because someone says, okay, good, you're an engineer, validation granted. But what you do shows that it doesn't have to only be working for Tesla making electric cars, or working in an engineering company making infrastructural projects, or building dams, building roads, but it can be done on such a small level. There's so many nuances to it. So I think on behalf of everyone listening, and I think potential engineers, physicists, scientists, chemists, whoever they may be, I think I'd like to thank you for getting on the show and joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
All the best, and good luck. And if there's anything you'd like to share for people to reach out to you and get in touch with you, it'd be you can mention that to them.
You can reach out to me. I have a personal website. There's my email. I think I have a Twitter page. It's like, but I don't really check my Twitter that much. I also have an Instagram, but I also don't really check my Instagram that much. So if you want to reach out to me, you can just send me an email. I think that would be fine. Yeah.
Any way they can connect you on an atomic level.
or whatever. Yeah. No, feel free to email me. I think that's probably the easiest. And then, it's probably better to connect on a personal level. Like with society now, we're kind of making these broad connections, but never a deeper connection. And I think that because it takes time to make deeper connections with people. Yeah.
Brilliant.
But it's worth it.
It's worth it. Yeah. And I think this was a lovely opportunity to connect as well. And do stay in touch. All the best for your research. And yeah, I hope to get you back on the show when we are sitting on Mars.
Yeah, sure. With Elon. Yeah.
With Elon. Yeah.
Sounds great. Sounds great.
Thank you, Kayla. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, bye.